So Bad Gays, as the subtitle points out, is a homosexual history. It is a book co-authored by Hugh Lemmy and Ben Miller, and together these two men have gathered up the narratives and biographies of horrible gay people throughout history. And in each chapter we focus on one of those particular bad gays. It's told in a roughly chronological order. We begin with the Roman leader Hadrian, who you might know from Hadrian's Wall, all the way up to the gangster Ronnie Cray, who I only knew about from that Tom Hardy film Legend. And along the way, we get to know a lot of different gay men and a gay woman. What exactly was problematic or bad about them, what they lived through, what they did with their lives, and also a lot of context surrounding homosexuality at the time that they were living in. This is essentially a series of biographies about some of history's worst gay people. It's an interesting approach to homosexual biography and history, but the point of it is just to show a little bit of diversity when it comes to queerness in the public zeitgeist. Quite often we are fighting for exposure of queer people of all different types. And that leads us to focus on the merits of queer people, the great queers of history and what they've done for us, people like Alan Turing, and why these people are so important and how their sexuality or gender is a part of who they are and should be celebrated. Bad Gays takes the exact opposite approach, but for a similar reason, to show us that queer people are human, multifaceted, as terrible as they are good, just like every other straight cis-het person. It's a really, really fun approach to history, biography, and narratives in general. Let's look at some of history's worst gays, and how their homosexuality actually was a part of what they did, and even why they did the things that they did. And the queer people that are explored in here are really, really interesting. There are people in here that I was desperate to know more about, people in here that I only knew about through very superficial things, like I said, the Tom Hardy film, or Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia is in here, he gets a chapter. I didn't know anything about him, really. Now I feel like I know everything about him thanks to just how detailed and well-researched and well-expressed everything is in Bad Gays. Oh my god, he's melting. Oh, that's embarrassing. I'm actually just going to read out what Juliet Jacks, who is an incredible transgender journalist and author, said about this book on the back, because it pretty much sums it up. A smart, funny, and just occasionally catty tour through the darker side of LGBTQ+ history. Far from being an excoriation, this book is a sign of confidence in a community that no longer has to present its This book is a sign of confidence in a community that no longer has to present its antecedents, the opposite of descendants, as saints and martyrs, but as real people. Some of these gays were well-meaning but flawed, some of them were complicated, and some of them were just bloody awful. Oh my god. Oh, I'm disgusting. I think one thing that really changed me as a person while I was reading this was the chapter on Yukio Mishima. I've talked briefly in articles and videos about my relationship to Yukio Mishima. If you don't know who he was a fascist. He was an author, a bodybuilder, a film director, an actor, a model, and he was bisexual. His sexuality was intrinsically tied to who he was, because it always is. But he was also a horrible far-right fascist, a Japanese nationalist. He was a pretty awful guy, and he died attempting a military coup that he knew wasn't going to work, and then committed seppuku. I find Yukio Mishima to be a fascinating character. There was a time in my life just a few years ago where I thought I'd love to do like a PhD on this guy. I found him so strangely alluring. The fact that I did enjoy some of his writings, the fact that he was gay, and the fact that he was a horrible fascist. I found all of that so enticing and strange and exciting, and reading about him here really helped with that. But after a while, I decided that I just ethically didn't want to read and promote Mishima's work anymore because he was a fascist. And that was it. That was what it came down to. And I've had this very difficult relationship with Mishima because of that. He's such an alluring and strange character, but I don't like the idea of talking about him because he was a fascist. And fascism is on the rise in the UK, in the US, in a lot of places right now, and I don't want to talk about fascists. And yet Yukio Mishima is such a strange and exciting character, and he gets explored so well here, and because of my ties to Japanese literature and Mishima in general, I found that to be the most satisfying and rewarding chapter of this book for me. Depending on what era of history you enjoy, you're going to find certain people more rewarding than others. Hadrian, James the Sixth/First, Sixth of Scotland, First of England, who was a fascinating individual, but he was also gay. Lawrence of Arabia, Ronnie Cray, and there's a chapter called The Bad Gays of Weimar Berlin. That is a really interesting chapter because it's focusing on Nazi Germany and the gays of that time and place. And there were a lot of different gays in Nazi Germany at that time who were doing different things for different reasons. Some of them were politically far left socialists, others were far right Nazis. Some of them were scientists, some of them were military, and they were all coming at their own homosexuality from different perspectives. But if there's one thing that is consistently explored in a really fascinating way in this book, and I think it's perhaps the most rewarding thing in Bad Gays, it is the fact that homosexuality as it is defined these days is a relatively new thing, and the definition of homosexuality has never been set in stone. And the way that these people and the circumstances and political situations and religious situations that they grew up in and lived in, depending on the country, the time, etc., definitions of homosexuality hugely varied. There's one chapter in here, and I feel like an idiot because I can't remember which one it was. It might have been the one about Weimar Berlin, that talked about the idea of homosexuality as two separate things. There are effeminate men, ones that dress in feminine, bright, colourful clothing, who are camp and expressive and doing drag and cross-dressing and etc., etc. And those are terrible. All of that is not acceptable. That is unacceptable behaviour. But two men, two masculine, butch bros who are just fucking each other, that's fine. That's cool. That is a sign of brotherhood and camaraderie and closeness between two macho manly men. This difference between what is gay and what is gay is absolutely fascinating. You cannot be an effeminate man. That's gay. But you can have sex with other men in a really manly way. Sure, that's great. And that crops up again and again throughout the book in different chapters in different ways. It talks about the Greek relationship to homosexuality, to femininity, the Roman relationship, and how they kind of adopted and romanticized the Greek attitude to homosexuality and male relationships. And then we also look at how Japan did something similar during the Tokugawa shogunate. The definition of homosexuality and the way that it's changed throughout history, throughout time, from place to place, is perhaps the most riveting thing here, because it shows the malleability of language, of definition, of how we approach ourselves and how we see ourselves in relation to other people, and in relation to our cultural zeitgeist, what is acceptable, what is not, what is seen as normal, what is not, what makes us alien and strange and what doesn't. I find all of that incredibly rewarding because it shows how things change, and how conservatism, I need to look that up, is such a damaged and fickle and easy to dismantle thing, because conservatism is always about maintaining the status quo and keeping things the way that they are right now as if they are perfect and they should be maintained, or the past was better and we should go back to that. But which past, and when, and why, and whose, and how? And the fact that things change constantly, and change and growth are beautiful things, means that that is just impossible. Growth happens, and if you dig your heels in, you're just wasting time. As for how well structured the book is, every single chapter goes on exactly as long as it needs to, and you learn so much within each chapter, not just about the person, although you really do, from their birth to their death and everything they went through, but you're also learning about the time and place that they grew up in. There's so much context here. If there's anything you want to know about post-war, post-imperial Japan, you're going to learn about it in the Yukio Mishima chapter. If there is stuff that you want to understand about the way that Roman politics worked at the time that Hadrian lived, you're going to learn it in Hadrian's chapter. If you want to learn about the relationship between England and Scotland during James I/6's rule, you're going to learn it all in that chapter. There is an incredible level of detail, research, context that goes into every single chapter. Every chapter, I honestly would have paid a full book's worth of money just for that. There is so much meat and detail and context and beauty in this book. And of course you learn everything you need to know about these people. You learn their biography. You learn about their job, their family life, who they married and why, and where that person came from, if they had any children, how rich they were, what station they were at, and of course all the terrible things that they did. This book is about bad gays, and bad is a relative term. Some of them are quite forgivable and don't seem to be that bad depending on what lens you're looking through. Others are tyrants, and as I said, fascists and monsters. Some of them, you have to understand them in the context in which they lived. Others are completely unforgivable. It's amazing the breadth of ethics and morality at play here as well. These people are worth exploring and understanding, and the fact that their sexuality, their gender expression, all of that factors so much into what they did and why they did it is truly extraordinary. I learned so much about people I'd never heard of, and far more about people that I was already interested in. James I, Yukio Mishima, Ronnie Cray. These are people I was already really interested in, because like so many of us, I find bad gays alluring as characters. And this book gave me everything I wanted. Truly, this has been one of the most fun reading experiences of this entire year for me. I also read this book really slowly and read a bunch of books in between. I've been slowly chewing on this book for about 2 weeks, and I looked forward to every new chapter that I read. There is so much here to love and appreciate. I could talk about it forever. It's wonderfully satisfying. Please check out Bad Gays. This is my favourite non-fiction reading experience of 2022. I'm so grateful for this book, and I want more. And I understand that these guys actually made a podcast first. This book came after the podcast. I've never listened to it. I don't know anything about it. So I'm going to have to go and listen to it and subscribe to it and check it out, because I need more bad gays in my life. I think we all do. Subscribe for books.